Hey guys, it's Will from EDM Tips. Forgive the vest, it's really hot here. We are going to look at how to layer sounds to come up with something like this. So I'm pretty sure we all know how important layering sounds are. We can get things sounding much bigger, we can get things sounding much more interesting and unique if we layer sounds rather than just using straight out the packet presets or samples. Now there is a way to go about layering that is quite specific, and a lot of people overlook this and just layer up a bunch of sounds together. They're trying to make things sound really big, but quite often it can end up with a muddy, washed out sounding mix and even reduce your headroom so you can't get a lovely big fat loud master at the end of it. So in this video we are going to cover the music theory of putting together a layered chord progression. We are going to be covering the frequency aspect of layering, the dynamic aspect, the stereo field aspect, and we are going to be looking at group and bus processing once we've layered our sounds together. Now that might be enough information for you to crack on and have a go with it, but I'm going to walk through an example of me using all of these techniques in this video. So if you want to hear it in practice in real time, stick around, check out the video. If you like it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and download the free gift below this video. It's my 30 free EDM mixing tip. Now it doesn't matter which DAW you're using, you could be using FL Studio, Logic or Ableton or anything really. The concepts remain the same, so let's hop into the DAW and get it done. So first we will look at the pad example. Let's look at our pad. So we want a bass part of the pad, a flute part and a high part as well. So let's just turn off all the processing on the group because I've grouped them together. I'll show you why in a little bit. So first we have got our chord sequence, which is all of these chords, including the bass line as well. So it was these notes. I'll just copy and paste. So this is what I started off with. So nice and lush sounding, some lovely seventh chords there. So what I've done is basically split up these different chords. I copied and pasted the bass notes into a separate pad, which is our bass pad, and chosen a patch for that on silent. Now for the next part, it's the flute, the main, which is kind of the mid-range part of the pad. And I've also duplicated those notes into a high pad, which is Synths. Nice big lush pads. Now it's worth noting that you might not want to duplicate all of the same notes in all of your different layers because things can get cluttered frequency wise there. So for instance, we might have the bass notes just in the bass, the first two notes of each chord in the flute, and then the top two notes of each chord in the high. I haven't done it in this example, but that's a good thing to experiment with as well. And we're looking at frequencies first, so obviously we don't want all this to be a big mushy mess. So what I've done is simply, well, I haven't done that, but what you could do for the bass is simply roll off some of those high frequencies. And then with the flute, which is the mid-range, you can see I've rolled off the low frequencies. So where the bass is rolling off, the mid-range is kind of kicking in. And then with the highs, again, you'd roll off the low end. But you can kind of meld this a lot more. And you can see I've notched out a bit with the bell curve in the mids here to allow space for the flute. And that is how you get the different layers to gel together frequency-wise. You're just kind of looking at the spectrum analyzer. I'm using the FabFilter Pro Q2 here. It's really good EQ for this. So that's the fundamental frequencies of the flute. So that is why I've notched some of that out in the high end, and the bass isn't really interfering much anyway. So let's listen to them layered together. Okay, so now we've got the frequencies layered, let's have a look at the attack, the decay, the release and the sustain, not necessarily in that order. And this is so that we don't have, say, 3 layers all with fast attacks, because that's going to push our levels up through the roof. So we're going to get more clipping when we're running it through our mastering chain at the end, for instance, or anywhere along the chain. So we want to balance the harder attacks with slower attacks, and the same with release and sustain as well, just to get some variety in the layers. So with the bass, there's quite a slow release on that, and with our flute sound, that's quite a fast attack, because we want the kind of breath sound of the flute being played. Whereas the high frequencies, we've got a much slower attack, we've got a much slower release. So all of those 3 layers now gel together in terms of ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. And that is point 2 for how to layer stuff. Point 3 is the stereo field. Now, I've already done this to a degree, so I'm just going to turn off what I've done. So our bass on its own is already quite wide, and that is because we've got chorus going on here. We've got detuned, we've got 8 voices there, we've got 8 there and 8 there. So that's a lot of saw synths, all slightly detuned and spread out to the sides. But we might want our bass to be more mono. So what we could do for that would be either remove the stereo effects by putting the panning to center on all of these sounds. You've still got a bit of stereo effect with the detune. So then we could use either, well, let's just use the Ableton utility. And we can whack that there and just reduce the width to 0. So if we've got the bass right in the middle, we want the flutes spread out to the sides a bit, but not fully out in the stereo field. So we can do that using this free ozone imager. You can choose the width, so that's fully central. And then for the high pad, we want this really nice and wide. And we can actually do that when programming the sound itself. Again, lots of detuned saw synth, so it already sounds really wide, but we could use another one of those imager plugins from Ozone. You can see how wide it gets there. Or you could just pan the different layers left and right a bit. And all together, okay, and when we have got our layers, we can group them all together or send them to a bus. So here we've got this in our pad group. And the reason we do that is because then we can actually glue the sounds together slightly so they all sound like they're coming from the same place, or they're all kind of from the same instrument. And we can do that using a glue compressor, or the Waves SSL is very similar to this in the way it works, the kind of bus compressors. But we don't want much gain reduction here, we just want to gel those sounds together. So we're using a low ratio of 2 to 1 and a slow attack time as well. and I've just got release set to automatic, and then I'm making up the gain by the amount that we have reduced it. So you can see there's maybe 1.5 dB gain reduction there, so I'm just making that up, and here it's off and on. So you can hear, it just gels everything together. It's a really nice effect. And then of course, you can use your aux channels and you can send different amounts of reverb, for instance, to each of your layers, because you wouldn't want a lot of reverb on the bass layer because you don't want big reverberated bass. Things get very messy in the mix. So we're just having it on the flute and the high. And let's turn off the reverb and hear the difference. It's got a lot more space. And then of course you can add a little bit of saturation, bring out the high ends in your layered pad. Just to warm things up a bit. And you could even add something like a gate. And a bit of sidechain compression with the beat. You could even put the same gate effect on the reverb. And that is how you... Now it works similar with kicks as well. Let's say we want to layer a kick. I've actually got some kicks layered here. Got these great cymatics drum loops. They were free, so you can check them out over at cymatics.fm, I think. So we've got these kick sounds here. And you want your kick layers to have a different role as well. In exactly the same way as with the pad, we want to be looking at frequency and dynamics, and stereo spread less so, because kicks quite often are mono anyway. You don't want the sub frequencies all over the place in stereo. So here we've got our 3 kicks. So those actually interfere slightly. So that's a nice middle kick. That's got a bit of bass. We don't need that bass because we've also got an 808 kick, and that's kind of our bass. So we can actually just roll off some of these low frequencies of this kick. And it won't make an audible difference, but it will give us more headroom. So that's our high end kick, and this is our mid kick. And again, we can look at frequencies there. Take out some of the low ones so they don't mess with our sub kick. Gabba. And also some of the high frequencies. Now, this is fine for kicks. Okay, the high end of both of those kicks is actually bringing something to the table, so we're going to leave that one in. But you can see there are pretty much 3 transients all hitting at the same time. If we bounce this kick down, if we were to bounce this kick down, you'd see a transient like that. In fact, let's just do that quickly so you can see. Let's set that to record from 808 kick. So you can see here, we've got the transient at the beginning. So what we might do to avoid having lots of transients built up is actually slightly move where the beginning of the kicks hit. And we know from seeing the audio version of this 808 kick that the transient is right at the beginning. So here it's not actually starting till there, and we've just tweaked this one a bit so it's happening even further across. Now we can't really hear that audibly, but it's just going to give us more headroom in the final mix. So let's listen to the whole thing. And that is how you layer sounds properly. So just to recap, we've got frequencies, we've got dynamics, and we've also got the stereo spread that we want to consider whenever we're layering sounds to get them to gel together really well. Make sure every single part has got a specific purpose for being there, and you're not just layering up pad after pad after pad for the hell of it. Which brings me to another point. If you are starting off with presets, which I highly recommend because you don't want to be creating every single sound from scratch. There are people who get paid to do this full time. They're really good at it. So just use what they learn and start off with a patch. But quite often when you scroll through patches, they've got lots of effects on them in the soft synths or the samplers. You know, look at this one. Distortion, phaser, EQ, reverb. Now all of that sounds great when you're previewing them, but when you are building a layered sound that you want to be very clean and very specific, I recommend taking off a lot of those effects, especially the reverb and the compression, and then just adding that with an auxiliary channel to the group, and then you've got a lot more control over it and you don't have loads of washed out sounds from millions of different reverbs on each patch. And there you have it, guys. You can use this technique for layering all sorts of instruments as well, and try and get the sounds to match before you do too much EQ work, because the better the sound choices at the beginning, the easier the rest of it's going to be. So until next time, cheers and happy producing.